Good afternoon, everybody. Let's take a look at this very important tweet that I came across. It's important enough for me to do a voiceover and read it. This comes to us from Cultural Husbandry, a philosophe, at a philosophe on Twitter. The following information is provided via an anonymous data scientist and another anonymous individual who wrote a script to scrape the national ballot counting time series data off of the New York Times website. This is based on their proprietary Edison data source, which would ordinarily be impossible to access for people outside the press. The CSV is available here, and the script to generate it is here. I actually recommend that everyone go here and copy this. And that's what they suggest, that everyone back up both of these files, because this is an extremely important data source and we can't risk anyone taking it down. What we are looking at will be time series analysis, and you will see that it is extremely difficult to create a convincing synthetic time series data. By looking at the time series logs of the ballot counting process for the entire country, we can very easily spot fraud. One of the first things noticed while exploring the dataset is that there seems to be an obvious pattern in the ratio of new Biden ballots to new Trump ballots. That's here. Keep in mind the X and Y axis. Additional Trump votes added. Additional Biden votes added. As we can see on this log plot, for many of the counting progress updates, we see an almost constant ratio of Biden to Trump. It's such a regular pattern that we can actually fit a linear regression model to it with near perfect accuracy, barring some outliers. How could this be possible? Is this a telltale sign of fraud? Surprisingly, as it will be shown, the answer is no. This is actually expected behavior. Also, we can use this weird pattern in the ballot counting to spot fraud. Here is the same pattern for Florida. We see this linear pattern again. And again. This is Texas. And again. South Dakota. And again, all over the country, what appears to be happening is that points on the straight line are actually mail-in votes. The reason they're so homogeneous across with respect to the ratio of Biden versus Trump votes is that they randomly get shuffled in the mail. It's California. Like a deck of cards, since the ballots are randomly mixed together during transport, spanning areas occupied by multiple voting demographics, we can expect the ratio of mail-in Biden ballots to mail-in Trump ballots will remain relatively constant over time and across different reporting updates. Let's dig a little deeper into this. Here is a plot of the same Florida voting data, but this time it's the ratio of Biden to Trump ballots versus time. What we see is that the initial ballot reportings are very noisy and random. The initial reporting represents in-person voting. These vote reports have such large variation because in-person voting happens across different geographic areas that have different political alignments. We can see this same pattern of noisy in-person voting followed by homogeneous mail-in reporting in almost all cases. What we see in almost all examples across the country is that the ratio of mail-in Democratic to Republican ballots is very consistent across time, but with notable drift from Democrat slightly more Republican. This slight drift from Democrat to Republican mail ins occurs again and again, and is likely due to outlying rural areas having more Republican votes. These outlying areas take longer to ship their ballots to the polling centers. Now we're getting into the really good stuff when we see mail in ballot counting where there isn't relatively stable ratios of Democratic and Republican ballots that slightly drift Republican. We have an anomaly. Anomalies themselves are not necessarily fraud, but they can help us spot fraud more easily. Now let's look at some of these anomalies. This is the Wisconsin vote counting history log. Again, on the y-axis, we have the ratio of Democrat to Republican ballots in reporting batch, and on the x-axis, we have the reporting time. Around 4 a.m. there is a marked shift in the ratio of Democratic to Republican mail-in ballots. Based on other posts in the thread, this should not happen. This is an anomaly, and while anomalies are not always fraud, often they may point to fraud. So what happened just before 3 a.m. Central Standard Time in Wisconsin? This did. Milwaukee's 169,000 plus absentee ballots en route to county election officials. Around 3 a.m. Wisconsin time, a fresh batch of 169,000 new absentee ballots arrived. They were supposed to stop accepting new ballots, but whatever, I guess. It was supposed to be 9 p.m. the day before. By 4 a.m., the Democrat to Republican ratio was all thrown out of whack. That is because these ballots were not sampled from the real Wisconsin voter population, and they were not randomized in the mail sorting system with the other ballots. They inherently have a different Democrat to Republican signature than the rest of the ballots, quite possibly because additional ballots were added to the batch, either through backdating or ballot manufacturing or software tampering. This being kind of analogous to carbon-14 dating, but for ballot batch authenticity. Let's look at another anomaly. Here is Pennsylvania's vote counting history. For the first part of the vote counting process, we see the same pattern for mail-in ballots that we've seen in every other state in the country, which is relatively stable Democrat to Republican ratio that gradually drifts Republican as more ballots come in from rural outlying areas. Rural. But then, as counting continues, the Democrat to Republican ratio in mail-in ballots inexplicably began increasing. Again, this should not happen, and it is observed almost nowhere else in the country because all of the ballots are randomly shuffled in the mail system and should be homogeneous during counting. The only exceptions to this are other suspect states that also have anomalies. Again, this is evidence of ballot backdating, manufacturing of software tampering. Let's look at another anomaly. When it straightens out like that, that's an anomaly. Nothing random about it. In Georgia, we see pretty much the same story as Pennsylvania, increasing fractions of mail-in Democrat ballots over time, even though it defies logic, and we see this pattern nowhere else in the country. In Michigan, we see a combination of Wisconsin strangeness together with the Georgia, Pennsylvania weirdness. We see both sides of contaminated ballot dumping and ballot ratios drifting toward Dems when they should not be. Michigan. Here's Virginia. You see where it stops being random. Now, in fairness, Virginia is the only state out of the 50 that has anomalies but has not had accusations of voter fraud. Yet, I think this is the exception that proves the rule. Yet, to figure out what causes this anomalous shift. But here it is, so no one accuses me of holding it back. Let's wrap this up. It appears Democrats shot themselves in the foot because making everyone do mail-in ballots actually makes it easier to catch mail-in ballot fraud because all of the ballots go through the postal system. They get shuffled like a deck of cards. So we expect reported ballot return to be extremely uniform in terms of Democrat versus Republican ratio, but to drift slightly towards Republican over time because some of those ballots travel farther. This pattern proves fraud and is a variable timestamp of when each fraudulent action occurred. Please disseminate as necessary. Good luck. Stay safe. Be kind to your neighbors. And Epstein didn't kill himself. This tweet was courtesy of Cultural Husbandry. Please follow them on Twitter. And remember, let's free Assange. This was Keen James. Thank you.